All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another exciting lecture on business ethics. Yeah, today we're going to take a look at ethics in business and how it should be applied, I guess, is the real idea here, and also take a look at some of the ethical events that are unfortunately taking over the business world today. So make sure you get out your notes, you follow the Storm philosophy, sit back and enjoy. So what are we going to look at? Yeah, we're going to take a look at what exactly business ethics is, and really the idea of what is ethics in general. Right? We're going to take a look at how businesses and individuals in business should make ethical decisions. We're going to take a look at ethics in a global marketplace. Does it apply to, does your ethics apply to other countries? Right? And then we're going to take a look at some ethical issues. So business ethics. Well, it's pretty simple. It's a set of rules and guidelines that individuals follow when making decisions that their company faces. This comes down to the idea of morals and values in a lot of cases, right? Businesses don't make decisions. Individuals make decisions, and they make those decisions based on their own history, their own culture, their own morals, their own values, their own religions, and so on and so forth. When it comes to business, however, most of these decisions really need to be made in accordance to what their company's beliefs are, right? So the guidelines that businesses use when making decisions really comes down to three main components, and that's the idea that personal values of the individual making the decision will often guide the company's choices. The company's code of ethics and their corporate governance will also guide their decision making. And lastly, domestic and international laws will also guide their decision making, and it should. All these three things should guide their decisions, and we really shouldn't overlook any of these things when we're making such business decisions. Now, one of the key guides to making business decisions is what we call the test of disclosure. This idea is that you use this test of disclosure when you are faced with an ethical dilemma. So it's very simple. How would you feel if everyone knew about the decision you made? This is the idea of transparency, right? If you're not concerned, then you've made an ethical choice, or most likely you've made an ethical choice. If you are concerned by the decision that you have made or will make, if you're concerned what others will think, then most likely you have not made the right decision. Consider the decisions you make as an individual, how your parents will think, how your teachers will think, how your friends will think, right? How your future employers will think, right? All this should be something that you bring into your own test of disclosure. When it comes to businesses, well, this is where they need to consider their customers, their clients, their own employees, the nations that they work in, the governments and the citizens, right? Their stakeholders, their shareholders, right? All the people who have a vested interest in the company, they need to take into account their feelings. When it comes to ethics, however, there's really two ideas when it comes to ethics in a global world. This is the idea of ethical imperialism versus cultural relativism. Ethical imperialism is the idea that you view culture based on the idea that there are certain universal truths or values, and these are standard across all countries. So the idea of the Declaration of Human Rights, right? This is something that should be standard across all cultures, and that's the ethical imperialist view, right? If something is wrong in one country, it's wrong in all countries, right? We often use this opinion when we're talking about various human rights. The contrast to that is what we call cultural relativism. This is the view that culture is based on the idea that cultures have different values, that different countries have different values and different cultures, and that therefore those should be respected. The ethics of one country or culture are not better than those of the other. And even though you may not agree with it, the fact is it's not your culture, right? And the fact is we must respect all cultures. So there's kind of two perspectives here with ethics, right? Do you hold the ethical imperialist view, or do you hold a cultural relativist view? And I think a lot of it depends on what you are talking about. I think in certain cases ethical imperialism is necessary, where in other cases it may not be so, cultural relativism. right? So next we're going to take a look at ethical issues in international business today. There's many, but the major ones that we're really going to take a look at are environmental issues, sweatshops, or human rights, corporate corruption, predatory dumping, and poverty. So the first one is environmental issues, and this really concerns itself with sustainable development. Right? This is the ability that we need to meet human consumption today, but maintain the environment, preserving it for the future. This is critical for business. Businesses run on resources, and these resources are finite, and companies need to take more of a direct action in this and sustaining their resources. They can't look at using up the resources today. That's just not good long-term planning. And many companies have been responsible for pollution and resource depletion, and they're only concerned with the profit, the bottom line, right? So companies and governments often resist environmental plans because they believe it will lead to or impede their economic growth. Another issue that's facing is the idea of workers' rights, and we see this through sweatshops. We've talked about this before, but many factories in underdeveloped and developing countries in which employees work are working in unsafe conditions. Some people working 20-hour days, 16-hour days, 7 days a week, and so on. In unsafe environments, long hours, treated unfairly, and they have no chance to address any of these conditions. These companies or these factories exist because the global competitiveness, globalization has definitely brought increased competitiveness, and the only way to stay ahead is to just work around the clock. Keep employee wages low, and corporate greed and consumer expectations of these low prices follow suit. So companies that own factories in developing nations should and must ensure that workers are paid a living wage, able to speak up against abuses, and that's one of the ethical issues facing these companies today. Next up is corporate corruption. Now this is something that we've definitely seen. I mean, the 2008 recession was a lot of it due to corporate corruption, most of it, if not all of it. Right? This is when corporations and businesses and individuals in senior management positions are involved in illegal activities, bribery and fraud. And this is to further their own interests and their business's interests. Enron, for example, cooked their books, right? They made up fancy accounting procedures to make it seem like their profit was much higher than expected, and that was a huge fraud, and it brought down the company and many people's life savings as a result. Bernie Madoff, with what he did in the Ponzi scheme, again, many people unfortunately are getting away with it today. We don't know the extent of it because part of this corporate corruption is that it goes unnoticed until they're caught. But many people are only concerned with the dollar figures, the bling bling, right, and all that, and so they're trying to further their own interests. Next up is some of the ethical issues involving trade, one of them being predatory dumping. And this is where companies are selling their products in a foreign country far below the cost of production, below the cost of production and far below the price in that country. They're doing so because they're trying to undercut the domestic businesses. So the prices that are already being sold, they go way underneath that to drive out those domestic businesses. And then after the competition is gone, they drive up the prices. Most big corporations are able to do this. They are able to take a loss for such a period of time until that competition goes away and then raise the prices because they have so much money, whereas the domestic businesses don't have that kind of power and wealth. Right? So it's anti-competitive. It's not fair. It increases the sales of this foreign businesses, and it forces domestic competition out of business, which again, and that's employment for many of these people. And last is human rights. Right? So over 1/4 of the world's population lives in intense poverty. Right? There's also this accompanies lack of food, which leads to hunger, lack of shelter, lack of medical care, limited access to education, high rates of disease. And the unfortunate part of this is we have many corporations and companies operating in these countries, in these areas, in these regions. And what are they doing to help fight this? What are they doing to help provide for those who are less fortunate, right? We often hear about companies employing these people but far lower wages, and that's the idea of workers' rights. But with human rights, what are they doing to give back? I think one of the things that many companies are starting to realize is that they need to do some good. Do some good for this world. It will lead to a better world in the long term and profits for them in the long term. So that brings us to the end of our lecture. I want you to think about this. Can you describe the perfect ethical employee? Can you describe the perfect ethical corporation? What characteristics do they have? What are the components of the business? Right? So consider that. Make sure your notes in order, and that's it. That's all. That's everything. We'll see you tomorrow.